Hello, I'm Rhiannon Gibbs, owner and director of Odessi Consulting. We are lean continuous improvement experts, and I wanted to talk today about the importance of defining problems before solving them. So, question for anyone listening: how often do you find that managers and leaders you're working with are simply reacting to perceived problems or moving deck chairs around? In my world, good change starts with identifying the right change. It's said that humans are natural problem solvers and we're usually good at finding solutions, but what we aren't good at is solving the right problems. We often get confused between fixing and solving a problem. So let's look at a couple of examples. Unblocking a sink. We know how to unblock a sink, but what we often don't do is identify the root cause of why the sink is blocked in the first place and address that. An example that might resonate with you a bit better is where we recruit temporary workers because we are low on team members without looking at why we're low in team members in the first place and addressing the root cause of why people in the team are leaving. Defining and understanding your problem is half the battle. It's said that a problem defined is a problem half solved. I think it was Einstein that said that, but there's lots of different people attributed to it. So what I'm going to do in this short video is walk you through an approach and some tools to help you guide your colleagues and leaders that you're working with to identify the correct course of action, which will then hopefully make the rest of your change management journey a lot easier. So the approach is basically 3 steps. The first one is to take that metaphorical step back. You've probably already gone too far down the problem-solving route. So problems often present themselves as ideas that need to be put into place. And you'll recognise that if you hear yourself or others saying things like we need or we don't have. I often hear things like the problem is we don't have an IT system for that. The problem is we don't have enough people. The problem is our the problem is our structure isn't right. Stop. They haven't understood the problem. If your problem statement includes a solution, then you've gone too far already. After you've done that, you want to challenge the initial problem statement and reframe the problem. And I'm going to show you a technique for doing that. And then lastly, we're going to develop our understanding of that reframed problem. And again, we'll go through some examples. But let's take a look at step 2. So the reframing of the problem. You do that by looking at how different people see the problem. And you can take a very practical and serious approach to doing this. For example, use different personas like what would your customer say the problem is? What would your CFO say the problem is? A board member, Joe Bloggs with an office next door, or even a child. You can reframe it completely differently and make it a bit fun by using fictional characters, celebrities, or high-profile individuals. How would Rambo see this problem? But let's take a look at an example. So here we are. This is a problem, and I'd want you to think now about how different people would frame this problem. So if I was a tarmac executive, if I ran a tarmac and road company, I might say the roads aren't big enough for the volume of traffic. Ergo, we need bigger roads. Someone doing the school run might say work hours and school hours clash. Therefore, we need staggered work and school hours. A politician might say not everybody needs to work from the office. We need to incentivise businesses to allow employees to work from home. Car manufacturer might say it's old cars that break down and cause the traffic jams. So we need to sell newer cars. A commuter might say other drivers are too slow or cause accidents. A public transport executive might say the bus route is inconvenient. We need more buses and more routes. And children would say the people in the cars aren't going anywhere. And in this example, the child is absolutely right. So once we've reframed our problem and we've got a good definition of what the problem is that we're actually trying to solve, we can move on to developing our understanding of that problem. That means we will be much more effective at ultimately solving it. So there are some templates that have been shared along with this presentation that help you to define those problems better. And we're going to start with, so this is step 3 of the approach now, where we're developing our understanding of the problem better. So the first one we're going to look at is attempted solutions. Most problems in organisations people have attempted to solve many, many times before. And I've used an example of a problem that comes up many times in my world. So organisation that wants to improve their call waiting times, let's say it's a contact centre in any organisation and they want to reduce those call waiting times. And this first template is looking at whether things they've done in the past have made the problem better, didn't have any impact on the problem, or made the problem worse. Understanding the types of actions people have tried and the impact that it's had will help and inform an approach to delivering change that can work, rather than just doing the same things over and over again. And you'll often find there are themes in the things that have worked and that have not worked. If you look at this example, made things better, having a specialist team member in the contact centre to assist with complex queries during busy times, AI-enabled chatbot on the website to respond to queries. Things that didn't have any impact: limiting annual leave numbers, so the number of people that can be on annual leave at any one time, hiring more staff, a new call handling system, which made the problem worse initially, but then had zero impact once it had bedded in. Things that made it worse: introducing a daily target for calls people needed to answer, reducing call wrap-up times, close monitoring of break times. Starts to give you an idea about the themes and things that do and do not work here. So the more micromanagement you apply to this problem, and the work harder rhetoric, is really just making things worse. Now, the next three tools you'll see are actually very similar. They're about understanding the problem at its worst. So there's making a meal of the problem, understanding the problem at its worst, and understanding what the problem looks like solved. But it's all about understanding what good looks like. For example, if your problem was that your customers have very long wait times when they contact your helpline, then your problem at its worst might include the things over here. So at its worst, we'd have very flustered team members. We'd get calls that get disconnected and have to be called back. We'd have lots of communications sent out from the organisation to customers in the same week, creating a peak of demand on the team. We'd have lots of sickness. We'd have lots of annual leave at the same time. Our phone lines would be glitchy. There'd be lots of new, inexperienced call answering staff or people from agencies, non-working chatbots. The chatbot would be down, and operational teams who just aren't responding to those more complex queries. You could have anything in here. You could have, a blizzard that makes it really difficult for people to get into work, anything you like. But what basically is the recipe, or what would need to be present for the problem to be at its absolute worst? And then the principle is simple. You take the opposite of that and you say, actually, what do we then therefore need? The opposite to those things, so that it's better. And that's what this tool does, and the next three tools as well, is it's basically drawing out the conditions for success. And as I mentioned, this does exactly the same. This is about drawing or describing what the problem would look like if it was solved, and then identifying what needs to be present in order to make that happen. I would advocate using either the tool before or this one or the next one. Depends on what your audience like, or even if you have a preference from a facilitation point of view. And this exercise is quite fun as well. We turn it into making a meal of the problem. So we write the recipe for how you would create the biggest problem. It's just like the first one, but a different way of framing it. The last tool I want to introduce you to is one looking at conditions and exceptions for the problem to exist. This is particularly useful for making sure you're focusing in, when it comes to problem solving, on the right areas, and you're not solving problems you don't need to solve. This is actually a really fantastic template. It requires you to do a bit of research or understand the problem in a bit more depth, but basically you go through and you've got problem exists and exceptions, and it's when does it exist. So following our call centre example, the problem exists during peak times, which are those, and all day Monday, but not any other times, and the contact centre is open from 8:30am till 8pm. Where is it an issue? Well, calls from urban areas. There's an increase of 30% in London customers on Monday mornings. You don't need an exception in that case. It's like all others is the exception. Who is the problem for? Portal users, so people that would usually log queries through portals, interestingly, not those that would always call the call centre. Seems to be the increase in portal users that's creating this issue. And it's not an exception, it's an exception for people with limited access to technology. So not necessarily older people, but people who don't use or have more limited access to technology, people that would usually call. They're a good steady 20% of all contacts received, and there's no change for them. Okay, so it starts to tell you a little bit about what problem you're solving here, and then what is the problem. So people are querying their account balances, so 34% increase on Mondays, and calls about whether payments have been received to 15%. So you see all this information starts to come together, and this was a real example, and the issue here was to do with when the IT system got updated with account balances and payments. And it didn't get updated from something like midday on a Friday until about midday on a Monday. It would do an update run because of the weekend. And so people that expected, frankly, instant access to information, or for information to be updated instantly about balances and payments, weren't getting that. Whereas people that don't use the technology would get their monthly written statements and they would all be accurate. Do you see what I mean? But it was only through doing this exercise that we were able to identify and understand the problem better. So, armed with all this information, you can embark on identifying and selecting a solution and putting it in place. Of course, you should do this with the people who are experiencing the problem, rather than making assumptions on their behalf. These people will not only understand the problem the best, but they'll also be most invested in solving it. I hope you find these useful. As I say, the purpose of this is, when you are presented with a change to deliver, is it arms you with some tools and techniques to go back and challenge the solution people have selected. Were they solving the right problem in the first place? Well, let's face it, we don't need another IT solution that goes nowhere. Okay. If you want to chat about this at all, do get in touch. My details are on the slide now, rhiannon@edessi.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am not that active, but I do check it regularly. And there's a little bit about Edessi and who we are. If you work in these sectors, or you have clients and you want to chat about their requirements, then yeah, do get in touch. Thanks very much.